Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus, or the Boob Anus for the purposes of GarbAugust, and today's video is a GarbAugust related video. One of the weekly prompts for GarbAugust is Paperbacks from Hell, and I figured I would share some Paperbacks from Hell recommendations. So first off, if you don't know what GarbAugust is, it is a month-long readathon taking place during August, devoted to reading trash, and this is created by the criminal mastermind Olly. I will of course leave his channel linked below, and there are also a bunch of amazing co-hosts and me, and I will leave everyone's channels linked below, so please do go check them out if you aren't already subscribed to them. So many great people involved, and yeah, it's great to see everyone's videos. So yeah, I'm just wanting to throw another one into the mix, specifically regarding Paperbacks from Hell. And secondly, if you don't know what Paperbacks from Hell is, it is a book, Paperbacks from Hell, The Twisted History of 70s and 80s Horror Fiction by Grady Hendrix. This is a non-fiction book that came out a few years ago. Yeah, it's exactly what it says on the tin, and goes through all of these amazing vintage horror titles and their incredible cover art and such like. And so yeah, one of the prompts for GarbAugust is to read a paperback from hell. And I love horror, it is my favourite genre, and I love vintage horror specifically. There's just something about that era that just really does something for me. So I figured I would pick some recommendations to talk about in case you're looking for inspiration. Oh, and also when using the term paperbacks from hell, I don't use it for only books that were in the book Paperbacks from Hell. I use it more as an umbrella term for any horror during that era. So yeah, I feel like most people use it as a catch-all term now rather than specifically only the books in the book. But yeah, just to clarify. So I'm going to start off the video with a top 10 trashy horror book recommendation list. And then I'm also going to talk about some recommendations for some of the prompts on the bingo board. So yeah, lots of books to go through. I'll try not to ramble about them too much. And just to talk about, you know, why I picked these books in particular for GarbAugust specifically, I wanted to pick books that not only have I enjoyed and would recommend, but ones that I think, you know, fit more in the trashy end of horror for one reason or another. And by that, I mean ones that maybe, yeah, cash in on a certain fear, i.e. are Satanists living next door to you, or ones that are just, yeah, cashing in on the horror boom of the time by just coming out with whatever the hell they thought of and wanted to publish. Or maybe it's books that just use, you know, titillating sex and violence at every single opportunity. Or maybe it's ones that are just a bit crazy. They're a bit bonkers, they're a bit wacky. And yeah, so those are kind of the things I was keeping in mind when I was picking these books specifically. And you could maybe even argue that any horror book published during the 70s and 80s is trash because it was cashing in on the horror boom of the time. But anyway, open to discussion. So I have 10 recommendations for you, plus one bonus recommendation. And these are all books that I have read and would personally recommend. Most of these I actually think are genuinely great books. You know, I don't think they're trashy in a bad way. And there are a few on the list that, while they might not be genuinely great, they were at least entertaining. So well worth including. So let's start this off with a classic, Flowers in the Attic by Virginia Andrews, or V.C. Andrews. This is, yeah, such a notorious book, and I actually only read it for the first time last year for GarbAugust and loved it. It ended up being one of my favourite books of the whole year. So this is, yeah, kind of gothic melodrama, dark family secrets, lots of terrible people doing terrible things, and incest. So while there are definitely trashy elements here, I really thought this was an excellent read, and yeah, had some really disturbing moments and yeah, emotional impact. And riffing on the V.C. Andrews theme, my next recommendation is Disturb Not the Dream by Paula Trachtman, which was definitely a cash-in on the V.C. Andrews boom. And this is about, yeah, it's a wealthy family with dark secrets. It's super dysfunctional, lots of problematic sexual stuff, including incest, of course. Yeah, this one was a wild one, and I remember when I read it in my review, I described it as V.C. Andrews on crack. So take that for what it's worth. And also, on a slightly other tangent from V.C. Andrews, we have my next recommendation, which is Pin by Andrew Niederman. So this is about a brother and sister who had a bit of a slightly not normal upbringing. Their father was a doctor, and he would teach them various things through a like medical anatomical life-size model. Totally fine, nothing wrong there at all. And anyway, we are following this brother and sister as they are a bit older, and you can probably guess there's some incest going on, of course. It was the 80s, and that was just in every book, apparently. Yeah, this was another one I really enjoyed. It is, yeah, it's odd and unsettling and brilliant. But yeah, the V.C. Andrews connection is that Andrew Niederman went on to write a bunch of books under V.C. Andrews' name after she died. So yeah, kind of just tying that in there. Oh, and this one also has an amazing step back art. Sorry for the glare there. But yeah, definitely one of my favourite covers, and I definitely recommend the read. Okay, the rest aren't V.C. Andrews related in any way. So next up is The Fog by James Herbert. This was a book I read as a teenager. It was probably one of the first like adult horror novels I read after a diet of point horror and a bit of Christopher Pike. And I read this, and yeah, my mind was kind of blown. So this is about a fog that rolls into town and turns people crazy. And so there's, yeah, basically a lot of sex and violence in here. Yeah, one scene in particular that, even though I have not read this since my teenage years, is ingrained in my mind and will be forever. So I feel like that's, you know, a pretty great recommendation right there. And yeah, James Herbert does like to introduce characters purely to then kill them off. So, you know, if you just want a bunch of sex and violence, then I would definitely recommend this one. Next up is The Nursery by William W. Johnstone. Now, you might have heard his name before. He's definitely one of the trashier horror writers of the era. And one of his other books, I think it's The Devil's Laughter, is the group read for GarbAugust, so I'm very much looking forward to diving into that. This is actually the only book of his I've read so far, but I had to include it on this list because it's definitely one of the more bonkers horror novels that I have read. This one is about a guy that returns to his hometown and finds that the town is kind of run by this like underground group of Satanists that are breeding babies. There's, yeah, lots of sex going on, very, very cringy sex going on, including a lot of anal. So, you know, just throwing that out there. Yeah, this was not very well written. The characters are all just really bad, and but it was very entertaining. So, William W. Johnstone, everyone. Next up is The Omen by David Seltzer, and yeah, maybe one of the less trashy books on this list in terms of, you know, the story and the writing, but I guess it does cash in on the whole, you know, let's be scared of the devil thing, and it is also a novelisation, so that's, you know, another bingo board moment. So this one is about a couple who have a child, and it turns out he is the reincarnation of the devil, and yeah, it goes from there. This is one of the like early horror films that I saw when I was younger, and yeah, is one I've always loved ever since. And I read this book, yeah, a few years ago, and it was really good. And you know, some differences to the film itself, but otherwise, yeah, sticks pretty closely to it. It's written by the same person who wrote the script. So yeah, and I believe the book was released at the same time as the film was. So that's quite interesting. It wasn't something that, you know, was an afterthought to cash in, but they were just cashing in from the get-go, I guess. But yeah, highly recommend The Omen if you haven't read it. Next up, another wacky one is What's Wrong with Valerie by D.A. Fowler. I've read a few of this author's work and loved them, but this was the first one, so this is kind of still like my go-to recommendation to get into her work, because yeah, this was just really wild and crazy and so much fun. This is about a woman, Valerie, who inherits a house from, I think, her grandmother or, you know, elderly relative, and she moves in and she is wanting to start a writing career. But as she's, you know, trying to settle down and focus on her writing, she is visited by various ghosts and demons and things. But, you know, is this really happening or is it all in Valerie's head? This one is, yeah, another wild time and very entertaining. And yeah, there's, you know, dark humour in there as well. Like, her writing is, yeah, just a really good time. So definitely recommend this one. Next is Haunted by Tamara Thorne. This is about a writer. I didn't pair those together. I just realised they were next to each other with the whole writer element. But yeah, this is about a writer who moves into a house because it's supposed to be haunted and he wants to write about it. So he and his daughter move in, and this house is known to be, you know, a house of ill repute, and there was a massacre there years ago, and so, you know, there were ghosts there, and some of them are horny ghosts, and there is ghost sex involved in this story. So I don't know if I need to say any more, really. You know, you're either into that or you're not. But yeah, this was a pretty fun one. There's also voodoo, of course, because why not? This was another fun and entertaining read that I think, yeah, more people should check out if they are so inclined. Okay, next up is the Witches series by James Dark, which is a pseudonym, so you could always use that for that prompt on the bingo board as well. And this is a series of 8 books that came out in the 80s, set in Britain during the times of the witch trials. So we have one character who is trying to track down the Witchfinder General because of some stuff that the Witchfinder did to the main character's family. So this is kind of in part like an men's adventure type of series. It's just that it's set like in a historical period, and we've got these horror elements and the whole, you know, witch thing and Witchfinder stuff going on. So I've only read the first 3 of this series, but really enjoyed them, and they're really, you know, tiny books, but they do have the most incredible artwork. So I will just go through those just to show you, because they're all amazing. And I remember seeing these somewhere and just had to track them down. Ever grateful for my friend Sandy for helping me with that quest. And I guess these would also count for nudity on the cover because, you know, there's a little bit of skin here and there. And I don't know how easy these are to come by, so apologies if they're harder to find, but I had to include them. Come on, you wanted to see those covers, right? Next up, Richard Lehman. I had to include one of his books on here. I've only read a few, but I feel like this is probably the most lurid and crazy one of the ones I've read. This is Resurrection Dreams, and this is about a guy who for his like school science project decided to try and reanimate a corpse. Didn't go down too well, and he was, you know, sent off to some kind of hospital, and anyway, the story picks up years later when he has now been released and is trying to get on with his life, and we're following our main character, who is a woman who he went to school with when they were younger. She is moving back to her hometown for work, and anyway, yeah, their paths eventually cross, craziness happens. Yeah, so this one, yeah, there's a lot of Richard Lehman's famous rumps and panties and, yeah, cringy sexual content. But yeah, this was a wild ride, super fun, yeah, gruesome, and yeah, just everything you might want from a Richard Lehman novel, I would say. Okay, so that was my top 10 Paperbacks from Hell recommendations. I do have a bonus recommendation, which is Garth Marenghi's Terror Tome. So if you're not familiar with Garth Marenghi, I suggest you look him up and watch Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which is one of my favourite things ever. I talk about it all the time. Garth Marenghi himself is an author, dreamweaver, visionary, plus actor. And we were treated to Terror Tome, which came out last year, and yeah, is just all of the 80s pulpy, trashy horror you could ever dream of. I highly recommend, obviously, the book itself, plus the audiobook, which is narrated by Marenghi himself. It is, yeah, so much fun. So I figured I'd add this in as a bonus recommendation, since it's not really technically a paperback from hell, but you know, the vibes are there. Okay, so next up, I thought it would also be fun to throw out some options for some of the prompts on the bingo board. If you've seen the bingo board, you know there are a lot of options on here. So I just picked ones that I could find some suggestions on my bookshelves. I haven't read all of these books. Some of these are just ones that would fit the prompts, so they're not personal recommendations, unfortunately, but you know, they would work if they seem interesting to you. Okay, so let's go with, start off with Killer Kids. So I've got The Other by Thomas Tryon, Creepy Twin Boys, yeah, great read. Also The Godsend by Bernard Taylor, yeah, creepy kid who is adopted by a family who already have other children. The other children start dying one by one. Maybe it was, yeah, the creepy kid they adopted. Yeah, those two are definitely more your quiet, slow burn horrors, both really, really good. Definitely recommend. Childmare by A.G. Scott, which I believe is a pseudonym, so you could use that for that prompt. This is kind of like a mix of The Fog by James Herbert and like Village of the Damned or something, because it's involving, yeah, something that happens to all of the kids and teenagers that turns them into violent, crazy people. Next up, Sexy Vampires. We've got Live Girls by Ray Garton. This is about a guy who goes to a peep show and, yeah, maybe gets more than he bargained for. There's a vampire involved. She's sexy. What more could you want? I also have Liquid Diet by William Tedford, which is a bit of a lesser known title, and I remember being pretty good. And this one, I think the way that the vampires you know, feed from the humans, it gives the humans like the equivalent of like the best orgasm ever. So that's, I guess, their way of subduing the humans so they can drink their blood. So I guess that works for sexy. And then a couple that I haven't read, but it looks like there might be sexy vampires involved. We've got Kiss of the Vampire by Lee Weathersby. They look like they're out for a good time. And also Blood Ties by Karen E. Taylor. Check them out. So yeah, I can't tell you anything about them, but they look fun. Okay, next up, Richard Lehman. I already, yeah, mentioned a book by him, Resurrection Dreams. Next up is Nudity on the Cover. Okay, so we've got The Pics by John Buell. Really beautiful cover, and yeah, definitely nudity on there. This is more of a like noir detective kind of story, but there is also some kind of like dark arts related stuff going on. So, you know, this would work. And then this one I haven't read, but it looks amazing. This is The Guardians #2, Dark Ways to Death by Peter Saxon, which I also think is a pseudonym. But yeah, bit of nudity on there. And it says devil worship, voodoo and supernatural terror. So yeah, count me in. And one more, bit of Dennis Wheatley here, The Irish Witch. Yeah, definitely a bit of nudity going on there. Okay, next up, A Book with Satanists. So yeah, gotta go with the classic here. Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. You know, are Satanists living next door to you? Yeah, yes they are. Yeah, this is like an excellent book, 5-star read, fantastic, classic of the genre. Yeah, if you haven't read it, read it. Also, The Omen by David Seltzer would work. Yeah, going from are Satanists living next door to you to is your child the literal devil? Oh, and I feel like a bunch of Dennis Wheatley's books would also work for that. I feel like most of his stuff was about Satanists, so yeah, have at it. I've only read To the Devil a Daughter by him, but it was good. I forgot to grab it off my shelf, I'm now realising. But yeah, anyway, Dennis Wheatley would be a good one to look into for that prompt. The next prompt here is Step Back Cover. So that is a book with, you know, you've got your cover right there, and then behind it you've got more artwork. It's a step back. And this one's a pretty great one. The Midnight Hour by Donald Bacon. Yeah, wonderful stuff. Have not read this one, but it looks amazing. And also I showed this one earlier. Pin is a great example with, yeah, a lot of the VC Andrews books have, yeah, step back art. A cigarette ad in the book. I forgot to look for one specifically for this, but I feel like the 70s is probably the era you want to be looking at for cigarette ads. I feel like, yeah. An exclamation point in the title. I haven't read any of these, but I actually found 4 books on my shelves that have exclamation marks in the title. I was surprised. We've got Zombie by Peter Tremaine. That might also be a pseudonym. So many pseudonyms to keep track of. But yeah, amazing cover. That looks wonderful. Save Joanna by Francine Pascal, who wrote the Sweet Valley series. She also wrote a book about possession, and it's got this really crazy metallic cover. Who knew? Yeah, still need to read that one. We've got The Hand of Dracula by Robert Laurie. That looks fun. And also Vampiri, the second book in the Necroscope series by Brian Lumley. I read the first one, it was really good. Have not read any further in the series yet though. Okay, next up, Killer Animal. I feel like The Rats by James Herbert is a no-brainer. I haven't actually read this one, I know, my credibility just all went out the window, but I still need to read this, but I feel like this is, yeah, quintessential Killer Animal, and yeah, I really should get to it one of these days. One that I have read is Crota by Owl Going Back, which is maybe more creature feature than Killer Animal, but I'm just kind of throwing them all in together. But yeah, this was an entertaining one. Let's see, on the back it says, a mystical mixture of Native American legend and modern American terror. So yeah. Okay, cashes in on a moral panic, and I'm going with the Satanic Panic, specifically Dungeons and Dragons related, and specifically related to the death of James Dallas Egbert III in 1979. He was a teenage boy who I believe went missing. His body was found. He had supposedly killed himself. But yeah, when things were looked into about his life and what might have caused it, they found that he was into Dungeons and Dragons, which obviously was the reason, you know, couldn't have been anything else, like, you know, just life and other stuff that people have to deal with. No, it was clearly Dungeons and Dragons that caused it. It is clearly, you know, Satan corrupting the youth. Anyway, so on that very specific note, we have 2 books here. We have Hobgoblin by John Coyne, which is about a boy who is, yeah, obsessed with this Dungeons and Dragons type of game. There's also kind of like Irish folklore in here as well. And yeah, this was a good read. I actually thought I was going to hate it because, you know, I believe it kind of, you know, took some inspiration from the case I just mentioned, but I actually did think it was a really good read, and this one also has some pretty wonderful step back art, so there's another one for you. But one that I have not read is Mazes and Monsters by Rona Jaffe Joffer, King Jaffe Joffer. I can't not think that coming to America when I see her name. I don't know how you actually pronounce it, but anyway, there we go. Get back to the topic, Alex. Apparently this is supposed to be real trash, and yeah, really does take you know, sick inspiration from the case that I just mentioned. So I haven't read this, so I can't say personally, but that's kind of the word on the street. So anyway, I feel like these two would also work for a book from a very specific subgenre, as in Satanic Panic related to Dungeons and Dragons, related to the death of that poor kid. So yeah, a very specific subgenre right there, I would say. Next is a book published under a pseudonym. So yeah, I've mentioned a few throughout the video. And then last up, VC Andrews, who I already recommended Flowers in the Attic for. Or you could also tie those two together and go for a VC Andrews book that was written by Andrew Niederman. So yeah. Anyway, those are just a handful of recommendations that I thought I would throw out there. If you have any questions about any of the books, please feel free to ask. If you have any recommendations of your own, I would love to hear about them. And yeah, this is not an exhaustive list, of course, just, you know, just a handful of recommendations that kind of came to me that I thought I would throw out there in case it's of any interest to anyone. Let me know if you are joining in with GarbAugust. It's right around the corner, and I'm very much looking forward to diving into my TBR Oh Trash that, yeah, looks very inviting right about now. One of the books I'm going to be reading is a romance. I think it's like a Harlequin romance, but it's got like some ghostly goings on as well, apparently. I think it's called Phantom Lover, if I'm remembering correctly. And I'm thinking, since I am not a romance reader, I thought it might be fun to do a reading vlog while I read that book. So yeah, I guess I will do my best for that anyway and see how that goes. But yeah, that should be fun. Yeah, the whole month should be fun. I'm very much looking forward to it. I hope you are too. And yeah, like I said, I'm going to leave everyone's channels linked below who are also involved with GarbAugust. Yeah, please do go check them out, watch all of their awesome videos. Yeah, everyone's really getting into the spirit, which is really awesome to see. But yeah, I think that's about it for now. So I will wrap this video up. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye.